I noticed the absence before I noticed anything else. That's the thing about growing up with nothing. You know, you don't learn to see what's there. You learn to see what's missing. And Goldenrod, Texas, well, from the stagecoach window, it looked like a town that had everything. Painted storefronts with real glass windows, horses tied to posts with silver-studded bridles, women in wool coats the color of wine and navy, walking on wooden sidewalks so their boots wouldn't touch the mud. But I saw what was missing. The bench outside the general store empty. Not because it was February, not because of the cold. The wood was weathered smooth, but untouched, like nobody had sat together there in years. Neighbors passed each other on the street with nods that meant nothing. Polite, distant, a town full of people who had forgotten how to need each other. I pressed my forehead against the cold glass and looked down at my own feet. Bare, swollen from 3 miles of frozen road because I couldn't afford the local fare from the boarding house to the stage stop. My dress was made from a flour sack, and not even a good one. The letters were still visible, if you look close enough. Briar Mill Finest. I'd tried to wash them out. They stayed, like everything else I couldn't scrub away. The stagecoach lurched to a stop, and I just sat there for a moment. My hands. Lord, my hands were so dry they'd cracked open at the knuckles. I pressed them flat against the flour sack fabric of my skirt and thought, this is it, Ruby. This is what his money bought. A woman made of sackcloth and stubborn. I stepped down into the mud. February mud in Texas ain't like regular mud. It's red, thick. It grabbed at my bare feet like it was trying to hold me in place. And honestly, maybe it was trying to warn me. The cold didn't just touch my skin. It settled into my bones, curled up there like it planned to stay. Every eye in Goldenrod found me at once. I felt them land, one by one, like stones dropped into still water. A woman in a green wool coat pulled her skirt aside as if poverty might be contagious. The merchant's wife I'd learn later, her name was Mrs. Hargrove, leaned toward another woman and whispered something behind her gloved fingers. I didn't need to hear the words. I'd been seen that way my whole life. My chin came up. Not because I decided to lift it, my body just did it. The way a hand pulls back from a hot stove. Muscle memory, the automatic armor of a woman who'd learned young that if you can't be respected, you can at least refuse to flinch. And then I saw him. Elijah Cade stood at the edge of the platform like he'd been carved from the same wood as the town tall. Clean-shaven, broad across the shoulders, in a way that said honest work, not just God's favor. His coat alone was worth more than anything I'd ever owned in my life combined. But his face didn't match the rest of Goldenrod. He wasn't looking at my flour sack dress. He wasn't looking at my bare feet. He was looking at my eyes, like he was searching for something he'd been missing too. I braced for disappointment. It didn't come. What he did next, I still can't explain it without my voice going sideways. Elijah Cade walked toward me, slow, deliberate, the whole town watching, and I thought, here it comes, the apology, the awkward handshake, the look that says he's already writing the letter to send me back. He knelt down, right there, in the mud, in front of God and Goldenrod and Mrs. Hargrove's horrified face. He knelt in that red Texas mud in his good trousers, and he pulled off his own boots, and he set them in front of my bare feet like he was laying down an offering. "These'll do," he said quietly, "till we get you proper ones." I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. The town had gone silent, that particular silence that happens when people witness something they don't have a category for. Pity, I understood. Charity, I understood. But a man who ruins his own boots for a woman he's never met, who kneels in the mud like she's worth the ruining, I didn't know what to do with that. I stepped into his boots. They were still warm from his body, the leather soft and shaped to feet twice the size of mine. I had to shuffle when I walked, this ridiculous, sliding shuffle that should have made me feel foolish, but somehow didn't. He offered his arm for the walk to the wagon. I took it, not because I wanted to, because the boots were so big, I would have fallen face first in the mud without it. The ride to his ranch was quiet. I studied the land flat and wide, winter brown grass stretching toward a sky so big it made me dizzy. His ranch house came into view, and I cataloged it the way poor people catalog wealth. Real glass windows, not oiled paper. An iron cook stove I could see through the kitchen window, books on a shelf, books, a porch with 2 rocking chairs, though only one had a worn cushion. Inside, I set my flour sack on the kitchen table. Everything I owned in this world fit inside it. I smoothed it flat, pressed the wrinkles out with my dry, cracked hands like it was a tablecloth, like it was something worth smoothing. "The spare room's through there," Elijah said, gesturing down the hall. "It's yours, long as you want it. I'll earn my keep," I said. First words I'd spoken to him, my voice came out harder than I meant it to, sharp, defensive. "I cook, I mend, I can tend a garden if you've got one, but I won't be kept like a charity case." He studied me for a long moment, then nodded once. "Fair enough." That night, I lay in the spare room under a quilt that smelled like cedar and listened to the house settle around me. I could hear him moving in the kitchen, washing a dish, banking the fire. A mended shirt hung by the back door. Plain meals in a simple kitchen. No vanity anywhere. A millionaire who lived like he was still earning his first dollar. I didn't understand him. Not yet. But I wanted to. And wanting scared me more than the mud or the cold or Mrs. Hargrove's whisper. I didn't come here to be pitied. I came here to be useful. I just didn't know yet what use a woman with empty hands could be. I set my terms the next morning over coffee so strong it could have stripped paint. "I work," I told him, standing in his kitchen with my sleeves already rolled. "Every day. I ain't ornamental and I ain't delicate. You show me what needs doing, and I'll do it." Elijah leaned against the doorframe with his cup and he almost smiled. Not quite, but close. "The kitchen garden's gone to seed since last fall. Henhouse needs mucking, and I haven't had a decent biscuit since my cook left for California. I make good biscuits." Then I reckon we got ourselves an arrangement. I threw myself into that work like my life depended on it, because, it did. Not just the roof and the meals, the doing. My hands needed purpose the way my lungs needed air. I scrubbed his kitchen until the pine boards showed their grain. I mended every torn thing I could find: shirts, curtains, a saddle blanket with a hole the size of my fist. I attacked that hen house with a fury that made the chickens give me a wide berth for days. And I watched him from a safe distance, you understand? The way you watch weather tracking patterns, looking for signs of what's coming. Elijah Cade didn't make sense. He was the richest man in the county, but I saw him mucking his own stalls before sunrise. He ate beans and cornbread for supper like any ranch hand. He called every one of his men by name, asked after their families, remembered that Jim Tucker's wife was expecting, and that old Walt's knees were getting worse. I couldn't fit him into the categories I knew. Rich men took. Rich men looked through you. Rich men didn't kneel in mud. A week in, I walked to the mercantile for flour and salt. The bell above the door jingled, and 3 women turned to look at me. Mrs. Hargrove was among them, tall, handsome, with the kind of confidence that comes from never once wondering where your next meal would come from. "Well," she said to the woman beside her, not even bothering to lower her voice, "there goes the flour sack bride." The other women laughed, soft, polite laughter, the kind that cuts deeper than the loud sort. I bought my flour and salt. I didn't flinch. I didn't hurry. I counted my coins out slow and steady, on the counter with my dry, cracked hands, and I walked out with my chin level. But inside, my narration went tight and clipped, like pulling stitches too close together. That afternoon, I found it, in the back corner of Elijah's barn, behind a stack of old feed sacks. There was a wooden box. I pulled it out and opened the lid and the breath just left me. Seed packets, dozens of them. Old cracked paper with handwriting faded to ghosts, Cherokee purple tomato, Tennessee, yellow crookneck squash, Missouri, black-eyed Susans, Virginia, seeds brought west by families who carried what mattered most in their pockets and shoes. Seeds from lives that had been planted here and grown or tried to. I held them in my dry hands, and something stirred, something I hadn't felt since stepping off that stagecoach. Seeds don't care who plants them. They don't ask if your dress is silk or sackcloth. They just grow. I began sorting by lamplight that evening, my cracked fingers moving with a purpose they hadn't known they were missing. Over the next 2 weeks, I turned a corner of Elijah's barn into a seed station, cleared a workbench, found old clay pots, mixed soil from the garden with ash from the stove. I sorted every packet from that forgotten box testing seeds between damp cloth to see which ones still held life, labeling them on brown paper in my careful handwriting. It wasn't pretty writing. Nobody ever taught me proper penmanship. But it was clear, and it was mine. Elijah noticed. Of course he noticed. He'd come into the barn to mend tack, and there I'd be, bent over my seed table with dirt under my fingernails, and my brow furrowed like I was reading scripture. He didn't ask questions at first. He just settled in, sat at the tack bench across from me, and started oiling a bridle. We worked in silence, the good kind, the kind that doesn't need filling. And then one evening, without a word, he set a cup of coffee at my elbow, black with a little honey, which was how I'd taken it every morning without ever telling him. He'd noticed. I looked at that cup for a long time after he walked away. The next day, I found his work glove torn at the thumb. I mended it, left it on his saddle horn like it had fixed itself. He never mentioned it. But the morning after, there was coffee again. Same spot, same honey. That's how it started between us. Not with words, with hands that paid attention. I started visiting the neighboring farms. And this was the part that scared me, knocking on doors as the flour sack bride, asking for something. But I wasn't asking for charity. I was asking for seeds. Some doors closed. The banker's wife sent her maid to say she had nothing to spare. But old Mrs. Whitfield, 80 if she was a day, pressed tomato seeds into my palm with fingers so bent with arthritis they looked like mesquite roots. "My grandmother carried these from Tennessee," she whispered. "In her shoe, honey. Walked 300 miles with tomato seeds in her shoe." I closed my fingers around those seeds, and I felt their weight so small, so impossibly light, and yet heavier somehow than anything I'd ever held. 300 miles in a woman's shoe. A whole future carried in something you could lose between your fingers. The Garza family gave me pepper seeds wrapped in corn husk. Widow Calloway offered turnip seeds in a twist of newspaper and said, "Ain't much, but they're hearty. Like me." She winked when she said it. That evening, Elijah watched me arranging packets on the barn table, sorted by family, by variety, by the stories attached to each one. "You're building something," he said, not a question this time. "Something this town forgot it needed," I said. I didn't explain further. Not yet. The ice storm came on a Tuesday. No warning. That's how February works in Texas. 1 hour, the sky was gray and quiet. The next, it was spitting ice like broken glass. I was in the kitchen when I heard it, that particular crack of ice hitting wood. And I knew, before I even pulled on Elijah's boots, I'd taken to wearing them everywhere. Stuffed with rags at the toes, I knew. I ran to the barn, my seedling trays, 2 weeks of careful planting, of soil mixed just right, of water measured by the spoonful, were shattered. Ice had blown through the gaps in the barn slats and hit the clay pots like fists, broken terracotta everywhere. Green shoots tiny, impossibly tender, just barely alive, blackened by the frost, lying in the mud like small green casualties of a war they never signed up for. I dropped to my knees, and I cried, not dramatically, not the way they write in novels, with heaving sobs and theatrical grief. I cried the way a woman cries when she has held herself rigid for too long, and something finally snaps. Quiet tears, hot on cold cheeks, my dry hands picking through broken clay and frozen soil, trying to find, I don't know what, proof that something survived, proof that I hadn't been foolish for hoping. That's where Elijah found me, on my knees in the mud, our second time in mud together, him and me with dirt on my face and tears I couldn't stop. He didn't say a word. He knelt beside me, again, like it was the most natural thing in the world, kneeling in the cold, in the muck with a crying woman. And he started picking up broken pieces. His hands next to mine, his clean, strong, steady, mine cracked and shaking and covered in mud. We worked in silence. He didn't tell me it would be all right. He didn't try to fix it. He just stayed. He saw me broken. I waited for him to leave. He didn't. That evening, by the fire, I told him everything. The father who drank until the whiskey ate him hollow. The mother who sewed dresses for wealthy women until her eyes went dim. Beautiful dresses she could never afford to wear. The poverty that taught me empty hands meant empty worth. The shame that followed me like a shadow I couldn't outrun. He listened, quiet, still. The fire popped and sent a shower of sparks against the screen. Then he said something I didn't expect. "They see my money, Ruby. That's all they ever see. Not me, the bank account." He stared into the fire. Different kind of invisible, but invisible all the same. 2 kinds of invisibility, meeting in the dark, by a fire that neither of us had to tend alone. That night, I replanted every surviving seedling by lamplight. My hands shook, but they moved, and I whispered to those tiny green shoots like they were children. "You hold on. You hear me. You hold on, and you grow." The whisper campaign started at church. I know because Widow Calloway told me straight out, no varnish, the way old women do when they've lived long enough to stop caring about polite. "That Hargrove woman's been working the prayer circle," she said, peeling apples on her porch, saying you're putting ideas in people's heads, saying who is this barefoot stranger to tell Goldenrod how to be generous. I stopped walking. My whole body went still, that old stillness, the one I learned as a girl when my father's voice got loud, the make yourself small stillness, the if they can't see you, they can't hurt you stillness. She's got a point, I said quietly. Who am I? Widow Calloway didn't answer right away. She finished peeling her apple, one long, unbroken curl of red skin falling into the bowl, and then she looked up at me with eyes that had buried a husband, raised 6 children, and survived 3 droughts. You're the woman who asked for my turnip seeds and didn't laugh when I said they was all I had. That's who you are. But Mrs. Hargrove's words burrowed in. They found the soft places under my armor, the places I thought I'd sealed shut, and they nested there like winter wasps. I heard variations all week. At the Mercantile, she's only been here a month, and she thinks she can fix us. At the post office, Elijah Cade's charity case. Playing at being a lady. Each whisper a small stone added to the wall between me and this town. I sat at the kitchen table one evening and stared at the seed packets I'd been organizing for the Valentine's Day exchange. My big, foolish idea. A community seed swap, every family bringing what they had, sharing with those who had nothing, rich and poor, old and new, trading not just seeds, but the stories that came with them. Foolish. That's what it was. Foolish and Ruby. Elijah stood in the doorway. He'd heard the talk, of course he had. I can put a stop to this. One word from me and Mrs. Hargrove backs down. I'll tell Reverend Polk to announce the exchange from the pulpit. Nobody refuses if it comes from no. The word came out sharp and sure. My hands went flat on the table, pressed down hard. Fingers spread, like I was holding myself to the earth. I felt heat climb through my chest, up into my throat, and my voice dropped low. If they come because a rich man tells them to, they haven't learned anything. Elijah, they have to come because the seeds matter, because sharing matters. I looked up at him. I won't borrow your name to prove my worth. I either stand in my flour sack dress and I'm enough, or I'm not. He was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. You've got more sand than half the men in this county. Ruby Jessup. That night, I wrote invitations by lamplight, one for every household in Goldenrod. My handwriting wasn't elegant. It never would be, but it was clear. You are invited to a community seed exchange. Valentine's Day, Cade Ranch Barn. Bring what you have, take what you need. Everyone welcome. Everyone, including Mrs. Hargrove. I delivered them myself. Walked the whole town in Elijah's 2 big boots, sliding invitations under doors and into mail slots. When I reached Mrs. Hargrove's house, the biggest on Main Street, white paint, green shutters, I stood on her porch for a full minute. My hand shook. The envelope trembled between my cracked fingers like a small white flag. I slid it under her door, walked home in the dark, didn't look back. Valentine's Eve, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the spare room, my room now, I suppose, though I still couldn't think of it that way, and I cataloged my inadequacies the way other women might count sheep. No education past the 6th grade, no family name worth speaking, no money, no connections, no proper dress. I was going to stand in front of Goldenrod, Texas, tomorrow morning, and ask them to believe that a woman who arrived barefoot had something worth giving. Lord, Ruby, what have you done? The house was quiet. Elijah's breathing slow, steady, came faint through the wall. The wind pressed against the windows like a hand testing a latch. I got up, pulled on my coat, Elijah's old one. Actually, the canvas one that smelled like horse and cedar, and walked out to the barn. The cold hit me like a wall. February cold that ain't just temperature, but texture. It scraped against my cheeks, found every gap in the coat, turned my breath into small ghosts that disappeared before they reached the barn door. The mud was frozen hard under my boots. His boots and my footsteps sounded hollow, like knocking on a door nobody was behind. Moonlight came through the barn slats in silver stripes. The smell of hay and dried earth and something green underneath that faint, living scent of things growing in the dark. My seed trays sat on the workbench, the replanted ones, the survivors of the ice storm. I could see tiny green shoots in the half-light, stubborn little things pushing up through soil that had frozen and thawed and frozen again. I almost burned the invitations. I'm not proud of that, but it's the truth. I stood there in the cold barn with my hands hovering over the stack of leftover papers, and I thought, nobody's coming. They'll stay home. Or worse, they'll come to watch you fail. The old voice, my father's voice, maybe. Or just the voice that poverty gives you, the one that whispers, you're not enough. You'll never be enough. And the kindest thing you can do for yourself is stop trying. I reached for the papers. My fingers brushed the seedlings instead. Green, alive, impossibly, stubbornly alive. They hadn't asked permission to grow. Nobody told them they were planted by a woman in a flour sack dress, that the soil came from a rich man's barn, that the whole enterprise was foolish and doomed. They just pushed through, because that's what seeds do. That's what life does when you give it half a chance. I pulled my hand back. I stood there a long time, my dry palms pressed flat against the cool soil. And beneath the February cold, beneath the frozen crust warmth, faint, real, the ground remembering what it was made for. They didn't know they weren't supposed to grow. Nobody told them they were too poor to bloom. Maybe that was the lesson all along. Not for Goldenrod, for me. I left the invitations where they were, walked back to the house, slept like the dead till morning. Valentine's morning broke cold and clear, the kind of February day where the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. I was in the barn before sunrise. I arranged the seed table with everything I'd gathered, every packet, every jar, every twist of newspaper and corn husk. I labeled them in my careful handwriting family name, variety, where they'd come from, Whitfield, Cherokee, Purple Tomato, Tennessee, 1840, Garza, Ancho Pepper, Coahuila, 3 generations, Callaway Purple Top Turnip. Hardy, like me, I wore my flour sack dress, cleaned and pressed within an inch of its life. The Briar Mill letters faded to ghosts. And Elijah's boots stuffed with less rag now. My feet had grown into them. Or maybe they'd grown into me. I opened the barn doors at 9 o'clock and stood there in the February sunshine and waited. Nobody came. 5 minutes, 10, 15. The sunlight moved across the barn floor in a slow golden stripe, and I stood there watching it like it was the only friend I had. My heart hammered so loud I could feel it in my wrists. I gripped the edge of the seed table with both hands, my dry, cracked, flour sack hands, and I thought, even if no one comes, even if it's just me and these seeds in this empty barn, you tried, Ruby, you tried, and that's dust on the road. The Garza family came first, all 7 of them walking up the lane, the children carrying seed jars like treasures against their chests, then Widow Callaway, leaning on her cane but moving with purpose, a basket of dried bean pods over one arm And that grin, Lord, that grin that could light a church on a moonless night. Then the Tuckers, the Millers, the Dawsons, and then the ones I hadn't expected. The banker's wife, carrying a small envelope of herb seeds she'd been growing on her windowsill, quiet, almost shy about it, like she wasn't sure her offering counted. The postmaster, with sunflower seeds his late wife had saved in a tobacco tin. He held them out to me, and his hands were shaking, and he said, "Martha always meant to plant these. Never got around to it. I took that tin and I held it like it was holy, because it was. By 10 o'clock, the barn was full. I moved through it, this thing I'd imagined alone in the dark, with shaking hands, and it was happening. It was real. Women trading seeds across the table, leaning close to read the labels, their voices braiding together like threads on a loom. The Garza children teaching Mrs. Miller's boy how to test seed viability with the damp cloth method I'd shown them. Old stories, flowing like water. My grandmother carried these from Tennessee. My mother saved these every year. My wife planted these the spring before she passed. I wasn't leading it. I wasn't standing at the front making a speech. I just moved through it, matching seeds to soil, connecting families, my dry hands touching 100 other hands that morning, rough hands, soft hands, old hands, young hands. Then the barn went quiet. Not silent children still rustled. Feet still shuffled, but the adults felt it. A shift in the air. I turned toward the door. Mrs. Hargrove stood in the entrance. She wore her fine wool coat, buttoned to the chin. Her back was straight. Her jaw was set. She held something against her chest with both hands, a small cloth bag, pressed close like she was protecting it. Or maybe, like she was afraid to let it go. She didn't move for a long moment. I didn't move either. The whole barn held its breath between us two women, one who had everything and one who had nothing, standing 10 feet apart in a mud floor barn on Valentine's Day. Then Mrs. Hargrove walked forward, slow, each step deliberate. She reached the seed table and set down the cloth bag. Her fingers lingered on it just a heartbeat before she pulled her hand away. My mother's. Her voice was quieter than I'd ever heard it. From Virginia. She carried them when she come west as a bride. She stopped, swallowed. Marigolds. She looked up at me, and I saw at the crack, beneath all that wool and confidence, and never wondering where your next meal comes, from a woman who'd carried her mother's seeds in a cloth bag and never planted them. A woman who'd held on to something precious and never shared it. Until now, I nodded. Once, slow, she nodded back. That was it. No speeches, no apologies, just a nod between two women meeting in the middle over marigold seeds. In the barn, the whole barn exhaled. Conversations picked back up. Seeds changed hands. Children laughed. I looked across the room and found Elijah. He was leaning against a post, his arms loose at his sides, his face open in a way I'd never seen, his jaw soft, his lips slightly parted, his eyes bright with something that had nothing to do with money. He knelt in the mud the day I arrived. Today, the whole town did. Not for me, for what we could grow together. Spring came to Goldenrod the way it does in Texas. Sudden, warm, unapologetic. 1 week, the ground was frozen mud. The next, it was soft enough to turn with a spade. I'm telling you this from the kitchen garden. My kitchen garden now. I've stopped correcting myself. It's April. The Cherokee purples are climbing their stakes. The Garza peppers are setting fruit. And Widow Calloway's turnips are coming up so thick they'll need thinning by week's end. And the marigolds, Mrs. Hargrove's mother's marigolds, are the brightest thing in the bed, orange and gold, like small flames dancing along the border. Yesterday, I walked past the general store and saw old Mr. Patterson and the Garza grandfather sitting on that bench, the one that had been empty since before I arrived. They were playing checkers while their wives traded jars of preserves inside, arguing about whose pickled okra was better. Mrs. Garza was winning that argument. She usually does. I stopped and watched them for a minute, and I thought this is what was missing. Not the seeds, not the exchange. This. People sitting together. People needing each other out loud instead of needing each other in secret and being too proud to say so. My hands are still dry, still cracked at the knuckles. I don't reckon that'll ever change. Some things poverty writes on your body are permanent, like letters that won't wash out of flour sack fabric. But, they're always holding something now. Seedlings to transplant. A coffee cup on the porch morning coffee. 2 cups, 2 rocking chairs. Both cushions worn now. Elijah's hand. Sometimes. When we walk the garden rows at dusk and he points out what's coming up and what needs water. He called me his treasure the other evening. We were sitting on the porch, watching the sun go down behind the barn, that particular Texas sunset that turns everything gold, like the whole world's been dipped in honey. And he said it quiet, like a prayer. My treasure. I corrected him, gently. I'm not your treasure, Elijah. But what we planted together, that might be. He smiled, that almost smile I'd learned to watch, for the one that starts in his eyes before it reaches his mouth. I reckon you're right, he said. I reckon you usually are. I think about the woman who stepped off that stagecoach in February, barefoot, flour sack dress, hands so empty they ached. I think about how Goldenrod looked at her and saw nothing worth stopping for, nothing worth knowing, nothing worth a seat on that empty bench. But I also think about the seeds, how they traveled in shoes and pockets and twists of newspaper across hundreds of miles, how they waited patient, quiet, holding their life inside like a secret until someone with dirt under her fingernails and cracks in her knuckles put them in the ground and said, grow. I came to Goldenrod with nothing but a flour sack and bare feet. They thought I was the poorest bride in town. Maybe I was, but poverty taught me something wealth never could, that the richest thing you can give is something that grows. The seeds don't care who plants them. They don't care if your hands are dry or your dress is sackcloth. They just grow. I learned to be like that, rooted, patient, unashamed, and in this hard, red Texas dirt, I finally bloomed.